Hello everyone, this is Bentley. Real briefly before we get into the interview, I just want to let you know that you're going to see some video stutters and some cuts. We were having a little bit of some issues with some internet connection, so you're just going to see that. I did my best to edit things so that when we were having issues, you don't have like big gaps or anything. But just know that when you see that, that's what's going on. Otherwise, here's our interview with Dan from Aquarium Insider, a real-life fish farmer. Hi, Dan.
What's going on,
How are
Billy?
you?
I'm doing well, man. How about you?
Dude, I'm doing great. Thank you for your time. For the folks at home who don't know you, who are you and what do you do?
So my name is Dan Connor. I am the owner of Consolidated Fish Farms. We are essentially, I call it the all-in-one supply chain. So we are a true Florida fish farm, and we've been fish farming since I grew up on a fish farm when I was a kid. We own our own distribution, so we also sell to other independent retailers, fish stores across the country. And then we also do some local retail in our area. And I also started a small YouTube channel last November called Aquarium Insider, where my goal was to kind of give people an insider perspective into sort of the aquarium hobby.
Okay, and we'll get this out of the way right now. You have a YouTube channel, but it's perpetual no matter what happens. Do you sell fish online?
We do. We have been moving that direction. So our website is consolidatedff.com.
Great. So we'll have links in the description, but we're going to talk a little bit just about you, your story, and what was it like growing up on a fish farm?
So I guess when I think about it, I really didn't know any different. So for me, it just seemed like normal childhood. So when I was a kid, I grew up on a 20-acre farm. So like what I would call a traditional Florida fish farm. So holes in the ground. We had a breeding room. We had a pack out room sort of in that same space, a shipping container for an office. And we did mostly angelfish when I was a kid. So to me, that was normal. I would be out in the fields with my mom. We actually did angels, and we were doing green cobra guppies. So on like one day a week, like Thursday or Friday or whatever time, or Saturday I would do it. My mom would sit out in the field and she would sort and cull out the green cobra guppies from like 8 to 12, and that would be her Saturday ritual. And I would sit there with her and we'd cull out, to keep the lines clean, I guess is a good way to put it.
Okay.
And that's what I did. And it was, for me, just seemed like, hey, everyone's on a fish farm. I was like, I think 8, 9. We lived in a little further away. And then I think I was about 10, 8, I think I was 9. Back then, and it's still around today, but there was a viral angelfish disease that had come in from what I believe people thought was Singapore. And somehow it got to our farm, and it was airborne, not so much in the same area, but we're talking like miles away from other farms. So we weren't the only people doing angels. Everybody was doing angels, and everybody was losing them at exponential rates. Like we had roughly probably 500,000 angels at least on our farm, maybe 750,000, and we lost them all within about 14 days. We're talking fish from the back of the 20-acre farm, like in the pond, in the water, all the way to the pack out rooms, and the fish have never touched. They've never seen each other. We're talking complete wipeout in less than 14 days.
I can't. I mean, how long is recovery time when that happens?
It took us 2 years, and at the time, the short answer is I really owe a lot to my dad for that kind of stuff, because his immediate reaction was like, you can't sit there and sulk about what's happening. You just got to pick up and move on. We had a few other fish we were raising that supplemented, but then we started wild collecting. We were doing what we call freshwater hog chokers. So that's freshwater flounder, essentially. We were collecting those, and what we were doing, snails, plants, things like that at the time, just to kind of cover us.
Is that flounder like a type of a food fish, or is it still an aquarium fish?
No, it's super small, so it's not going to get bigger than maybe 3 inches or so in diameter. I actually we just had a wild collector bring me some. I haven't seen one in like 10 years. He brought me a few we picked up when he was out getting alligator gar for us. But yeah, that's what we did for 2 years to just recover to the point where we were. And back then there wasn't technology to determine viral diseases. There was like one electron microscope in the entire state, so nobody knew
Yeah.
really what was going on. But retrospect, looking back, it was pretty obvious now because we would have checkerboard barbs, in the same building, and then we put them in the same tanks as the sick angels, and they never died or ever got sick. So now we're
Wow.
seeing and viruses are very species specific in general. So that's how we kind of figured out that's probably it. But also, what we didn't know back then was that once a fish has it, if not all of them die, they can become carriers of that virus. And at some point down the road, it can reactivate. And sure enough, 2 years after we got set up, it happened again. But we didn't have as much production in angels either. We were doing a lot of Mbuna cichlids at the time.
Okay.
It was a much smaller proportion, so not a big hit. But that's the last time we touched angels up until the last 5 years. We started doing angels on a different farm now. And the guy who bought that farm from us, we just told him up front, like, hey, don't do angels. Don't you dare put a freaking angelfish on this farm. You're going to have some bad luck if you do that. So don't put them on the farm.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild to think, like, from a hobbyist perspective, the random idiot on the internet, how you recover from that, but then also just kind of knowing, like, I basically just can't do this fish that I used to have a million of or more at one point. I just can't do it anymore. Part of my bread and butter is just done because it can just come back. And that's terrifying to me as a hobbyist.
Yeah, I mean, because I was so young when that happened, to me, I didn't really grasp the whole how bad it really was. I mean, I never missed a meal. It was never something like detrimental like that, but I never realized how hard my dad worked to get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
To make that, to make it look like it was seamless. Like, it took so much to look back on that and be like, my God, like I think it's unfathomable, like how crazy that was. But it worked out in the end, and made it past that, and we moved on from that into just farming. We went into distribution maybe 2 years after the last time it happened, so about 95 or so.
Okay, so now you're both a distributor and a farmer. Mm-hmm. Walk us through a little bit of, like, from selling off the old farm and establishing the new one, kind of what got you from that point of just a kid growing up on the farm to integral part of the business and understanding fish the way you do today, and that especially this industry, because this industry, so many of us really have the slightest idea of what's actually going on in the back end, where you have a very intimate knowledge of it, being both a farmer and a distributor.
Yeah. So after we got done, we were still farming at the time, by the way, but there came a time where there was always this expectation that farmers had to find a way to keep competing with imports and lowering prices. And the margins were already so tight, a lot of the farmers were just kind of fed up with the pricing that they could get from distributors, sell their fish, right, in massive quantities, right? And that's what farmers do. Farmers only sell in distribution to large distributors. They don't have other outlets to sell fish. It's really not just available to them. So when your biggest buyers are saying you have to lower the price, you don't have a ton of options. So a group of farmers, it was 13 farms at the time, got together and decided to form basically a shipping cooperative where they would all ship their fish, and you would get what they would call at the time shipping price, which was basically double local price. So you have a local price that a farmer will sell to distribution, and then the shipping price is what distribution will probably sell to a pet store. Typically, that are like what I would call a larger wholesaler, where they're doing their own distribution in-house.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So certainly better for the farmers.
Yeah.
But also, because you're working together, you kind of have a little bit better control in
Hmm.
a sense of you can all work together and go, okay, this guy is going to cover this. That means I don't have to compete with this other person that's going to the same distributor. I can do this
Yep.
fish. It sounds like it's kind of win-win. So let me piggyback off of that. Why don't
Yep.
more farmers do what you're doing? Or
Um,
the question might be, are there just not that many of them? So you could only
yeah,
have so many cooperatives like yours.
I'd say the reason most one at the scale farmers are doing now. There's very few left that are doing it at scale. And to form and sell some sort of cooperative with those people being involved now, I don't know if it makes sense. Prices have gone up since then, so they are getting a little bit better price at distribution. There's a little bit better cooperation and communication on that level now, which I think has probably benefited the farms moving forward. But I think it would be the volume of fish they would be bringing. I don't think would touch the demand local distribution would need for the fish, and I think it
Okay.
would be hard. They wouldn't be able to. I think it'd be too hard right now. If the farms that are left that are doing it to say I'm going to go into distribution, they're only going to have maybe let's say 25 to 50 varieties of fish generally.
So
That won't be enough to supply the market, even if with an increased price increase with the
so
volumes they can put out.
yeah, let me ask a little clarifier because I think this context might help. With for
Sure.
your farm alone, your new farm right now that you're on, and new
Mhm.
will use quotation marks, but not the one you grew up on. How big is that farm in raw acreage?
So our farm is 7 acres, which is small
Okay.
comparatively to other farms we've had. So ours is what I would call more boutique distribution. So boutique farming, we've raised some stuff that's a little bit harder to get, where
Okay.
it's not available locally, and we filled those gaps. Like that's where angelfish came into play. So ours is 7 acres. We have 34 ponds in production. We've got one about 3,500 square foot grow out greenhouse. We've got a room for all of our brood stock that we're breeding in. And then we've got another, what I call a burial vault room, which is fish we bring in from the ponds that go into these separate 200-gallon concrete burial vaults, which is what your casket would go into in the ground essentially. And the fish get purged out and cleaned out there before they get taken into distribution. And
Just
then,
for anybody who's seen a tour of Imperial Tropicals, they use those very heavily.
yep.
And I know that's kind of one of the more common tours of a fish farm that's out there on the YouTube sphere. So to add some extra numbers to that, so people understand,
Yep.
average month, about how many fish are you shipping out?
So in distribution, we'll put out, oh man, it's such a wide number.
Or maybe it's easier to do per year right now. Like in the last year, how many roughly, it doesn't have to be perfect, fish have you guys
Month
distributed out?
might be easier. I'm thinking box lots. So we're not large at all. We might be putting out on average 150 box lots to stores across the country, 150 to
Okay.
200 boxes a month of fish. And the box lots of fish will range based on size. So to give
Right.
you an example, a full box lot of what I would call large angels isn't going to be more than 25. Typically, probably 15 to 20, depending on how size they are. But a box of neons might be 3 to 400, or a
Okay.
250 pack if they're smaller. I don't know if I can quantify the exact number of fish, but I'd say we put out around that range in distribution, to be honest.
Okay. And is that specific to your farm or is it the entire cooperative?
That's our entire business. Which, by the way, I will mention this: this was started as a cooperative. It is no longer a cooperative. It's actually just my family's business. So over the
Okay.
last since '95, the way it worked is all the farmers, and I forgot how I was asking my dad today how it worked, but essentially they bought the farm and the property for $100 out of pocket. Every farmer had to put out $100, and they got financing on a farm loan to finance the entire business for $100, and that's how they made it work. And then every year, a farmer would be dedicated X amount of dollars as a buyout in case they want it. And every year they extended, they got more money. But over the years, farmers have just kind of gotten out over the time, and about 15 years ago, 2005, 2008, somewhere in that range, maybe.
Okay.
It was basically down to my dad and his original business partner, where they had multiple farms together on top of the cooperative. And my dad was actually going into real estate. He told his business
Wow.
partner he was getting out. He's like, look, I've been doing real estate on the side for a while. It's picking up a business where I think this makes the best transition for myself. There's a lot of complications with this business right now. And that was when the industry was at its lowest. Like sales were basically rock bottom. Nobody was making any money. It was very hard. And that was the alternative to making more money. And the way they were going to do, they were going to swap deeds on the properties for the rest of the business. So my dad said, I'll leave you stuff in the morning. Here will be my deeds. I'll sign the little contract they drew up. I'll put our names on it, and we'll be good to go. So we went out to dinner that night as a family, celebrate and get out of the fish business. And my dad came in the next morning, and all that paperwork was already signed from my dad's business partner with his part of the deeds and the businesses. And said, hey, I took your advice. I'm leaving. And left the rest of it to my dad. And my dad slept. He didn't know what to do. So, and that's how we've been in it ever since. So we've never gone away from it.
So,
which is, I don't think I've ever told that on any channel yet. That's how it was going to go down. But
got the exclusive. So let me ask you this: like, when fish farmers decide they're gonna sell off, do they stay fish farms to someone else, or do they become something completely different? At least in Florida,
they become development for housing down here. That's really what they came up to be, because they had the largest chunks of land in the part of our county. In the south part of our county was probably fish farm capital of the country for a long time, and that's where all the development has been focused for the last 20 years almost. And land value down here is astronomical year over year, just value. It started in 2004 when the boom hit. 2008 was the mortgage crisis. It all crashed again. And then ever since then, it's gone all the way back up. And, land is over, I believe, $125,000 an acre in our little city here, which is a lot. And it's gone up every year more and more. So when farmers get out, that's basically just, they're done. And it's retirement, because they got a lot of land and a lot of money invested. So it's the way to get out and recoup some of that money over the years.
So we're kind of touching on it, but what is different in the hobby now compared to we'll go through your more like AMP business, because you're not going to necessarily know that stuff when you were a kid, but we'll go through even compared to the thousands at probably the deadest point in our hobby, at least in both our lives, because we're a relatively similar age. What's different now and then when it comes to what you do as both the farmer and distributor?
I think what we do is different from then and now. I think there's been a lot more demand on transparency, knowing more about practices, where your fish are coming from, what kind of fish you have. I think that's huge. So back then there was a lot of safely guarded secrets on how to take care of fish, sort of at scale. It wasn't common knowledge. And I think today probably still not common knowledge. Like, it's not something you can go out and read about in most cases for how to do this. And I just think there wasn't as much communication between the buyers and the sellers of the world. There just really wasn't. It was like, I need a fish. Here it is. There you go. I shipped it. Oh, these fish died. I need a credit on that fish. And it's a yes or no answer from there, depending on how that went. Nowadays, there's a lot more demand, I think, for imported fish, because they're not produced in Florida. Florida's good at a lot of what I would call the bread and butter type species. A lot of your tetras, a lot of your mbunas come out of here, a lot more of your common community fish, stuff you're not going to see produced here in Florida, like as a farm. You're not going to see rummy-nosed tetras. You're not going to see cardinals. That's not here. Neons are here. That's a big fish here. Neon tetras are huge. And the demand for those type species just are growing. So that's probably the biggest difference I've seen over the years, is the demand for new species. And the farmers are putting out new species. I ended up getting, sharks when that first came out, all your rainbows and ballas and things like that. There's an extension lab down by us called the University of Florida's Tropical Aquaculture Laboratory. And they do a lot of research in all fields to do with ornamental aquaculture. So from trying to breed new species that's never been bred, to biosecurity protocols for farms, new spawning methods, like the whole thing. They've been supporting the industry for forever. Now, I did want to mention this, and I don't know if anybody saw the report that came out. The lab down there just did a report, first one of its ever kind, really, of what was the basic farm gate value of fish farming in farms in Florida and businesses selling fish in 2021. Right, the last one they did was in 2000, I think 12 or 14, and it's a lot more in depth, a lot more questions. Where a lot of the farmers, because it's a very close knit society down here, really, they're not likely to participate. This year, it was done by it was basically the members for the FTFFA, the Florida Tropical Fish Farmers Association, which we're a part of, and they got like 90%, I think, participation rate, and the farm gate value was $175 million. Which, to put it in perspective, in 2014, it was like 27 million farm gate, comparatively. And the bulk of that will be farmer to, I imagine, farmer to distribution to retailer. So those sales are massive. It's grown. The business has grown because of all the things going on in the world right now. But to put that stat out there, and I'll find the report and send it to you. But that was done by UF and showing that there is a lot of interest in Florida fish, which is, I think, a good thing.
That's great. So, I mean, if you think that information becomes more prolific, do you think you'll see more people want to try and become fish farmers, or is the age of like getting a new fish farm in Florida kind of dead?
I would love to see new farms, and because one, there's not enough farms that can produce enough fish that are needed right now today. It would be a good business for an owner. I would call it an owner operator type business at least. The downside of that is the amount of money and influx of money it would take to start it. It would be a lot. You would have to have land, and be willing to work super hard, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Like, them fish got to eat. No matter what day it is, Christmas, New Year's, it doesn't matter. Like, you better have some money. The key is just investment in general would be pretty steep. I don't think anybody could get out of it, into it. And I'm talking at scale. You could build a greenhouse and you could produce a few thousand fish. You could produce 10,000, 8,000 fish a month, probably with a little less than $250,000 when you got done with it. But if you want to do it at scale, like at scale, it'd be hard to put it up for less than $500,000. If you include just stock in that. I think it'll depend on people think that's a valuable business to invest into. Optimistically, I feel like it's a pretty good business because legitimately there's not enough producers to produce what's actually needed out there. And stuff that's actually already been produced here in Florida that's not being produced anymore. Like, dwarf brownies. There's like one guy that produces dwarf brownies here. That's it. That used to be a very prolific fish here in the state, and it's not.
As I say, I can think of going to my local fish stores. One of the fish that seems perpetually in demand is the sunset honey gourami.
Oh yeah,
right. Beautiful little fish, pretty peaceful. How many people are breeding that fish at scale that aren't being imported?
Probably, I think 3. Not many.
Wow, that's. If you think about it, only 3 people actually producing that compared to even just the United States demand, not to mention going anywhere else, right? That's kind of a wild thought.
It's insane.
So, let me ask you this question, because I think you almost half answered it, but what makes you want to continue with this career path? Why do you, Dan, want to stay a fish farmer, fish distributor, instead of going, land values are worth quite a lot. We could just walk away and do something else.
Yeah. My dad spent his entire life convincing me this was a terrible industry to be into. He spent his whole life trying to get me out of it. He's like, you don't need to be in it. It's just too hard. And that's what I saw for the majority of my life. So he's like, look, we're going to put you in college. You're going to go to college, go get a degree, and go do something else. So that's what I did. And I was in my program. I wanted to teach philosophy, essentially. at the college level. So I was in grad school at the time, and I hated it. And I liked my undergrad, and it was great. And I didn't like it. I thought it just wasn't something I was interested in. But then I'm like, I'm so committed into this, and I've been committed into it for so long, I didn't know what to do. So I ended up leaving my grad program, and I moved back to the area. And a friend of mine was a biologist at UF, and she got me. I was like, she goes, "Hey, we're needing someone who can replicate farmer type environments with these replicate trials to test these new, uh, basically pharmaceutical drugs on." It was at the time it was post harvested fish, so they were trying to increase survivability from when fish are harvested to when they get put on in like a shipping box and in bags. They're trying to increase survivability of certain species. So we were testing anti-parasite medications, we were testing antibiotics, antifungals. We even worked with a columnaris vaccine for gouramis. So that's what I took that job. It was only like 2 years. And this is a long answer but I took that job. It led me to teaching kids how to breed fish for 8 years. I taught high school where I was showing kids how to breed fish commercially for 8 years. And these were mostly kids that were likely not to go to college. They didn't have a career path, and they really enjoyed. They were trying to find something they were interested in. And I just sat them down every day. I'm like, just like how my dad did. I'm like, look, these are your options. If you feel like this is enough money for you and this is something you're interested in, these are the people I'll send you to, and go get internships and start working. If you want to go to college for it, here's your options for college. Here's your options for schools. Here's your end goal kind of thing. And then when I came back on the farm full time, this was actually last year I left teaching, but I was working on the farm half time, still doing everything else when I got done teaching. And then when we started doing retail, that's when I really found out I wanted to do it. I didn't understand at the time how happy fish tanks made people, if that makes sense, because we didn't have that interaction. Like, you're on a farm, we sell fish to distribution. Like, I don't know what the end result customer looks for. All I know is the customer wants these fish. That's all I know. I don't have interactions with those people, and on top of that, a lot of the people we talked to didn't really have good information, and it made me feel bad. Like these are the people that are buying our fish. They don't have the proper information, even at the basic level, to sometimes care for them. And then what's going to happen when something happens to them? Well, they're going to die and they're going to get out, and that goes back to the model of death, I call it, where eventually you just don't have people getting back in the hobby. So ever since then, it's given me this like reinvigorated like passion behind like really trying to help as many people as I can, like put together a solid fish tank that takes less time, less money, and less stress. That's been my 3 sort of tenets with what I wanted to accomplish. And I feel like I'm doing okay at it so far. We talked to quite a few people now a week in our retail store, and that's been just fun talking about fish. I mean, that's all I do now. I just talk about fish all day long, and it's awesome. I love it, and I love the people we meet, and people seem very happy with what they get, and that they can come somewhere and ask questions, and I try to be, 100% transparent. Yeah, that's a good idea. No, that's a terrible idea. I wouldn't do it like that, or just be as honest as you can, because I don't see another way how the industry thrives if you're not going to put that sort of transparency put forward. So for me, it was just what really turned it around was just meeting more hobbyists that were just, they love fish tanks. And I will say this, I was incredibly surprised to find out how many people had multiple tanks. And I don't mean like 2 or 3. I mean like freaking 15 or 20 fish tanks. Like, I didn't have any clue that was a thing. I was thinking people, when they said multiple tanks in there, I was like, they got 3 tanks in their house. Some dude showed up and said he's breeding guppies with 200 tanks in his garage. He built another warehouse just for the rest of them. I'm like blown away by the scale some people were doing this at. I'm like, holy crap, man! You're like not.
Well, I mean, Lucas did just move to your state, so.
Oh, we did.
I don't know. Yeah, Lucas is now officially a Floridian.
Is that LRB Aquatics?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I've seen his channel, but I didn't know he moved. That's cool.
He's kind of building himself his own mini farm, if you will. He's going to be building out ponds and all sorts of crazy stuff. I love watching that madman.
I got to reach out, man.
Oh, dude, yeah. You should give that guy a ring. He's great.
I'm gonna have to reach out to him. Come to some of our fish farmer meetings, man. We got an association that's good for farmers. So I'm trying to get younger people and around our age, people involved in the industry, because I mean, there's not a lot of people left that are around our age, and I don't know how likely it is it all passes on. Imperial Mike's one of them. Mike's super good guy. He's second. I don't think he's second or third generation. I know I'm second gen. I think he's a second generation farmer too, if I'm not mistaken.
Cool. So this might be even more prevalent now that you have the retail side, right? What is, maybe it's one or two, but what are the most common misconceptions that hobbyists have about fish farms? We can especially go local with like Florida fish farms, because there is kind of some specifics there.
I think there's a couple things. I think one, I don't think, like, when people come here, like, we're not, like, if you look on our map, like, if you Google us, like, and you see pet store, people are like, that is not a pet store. I don't know what that is. It's got a bunch of holes in the ground. Like, they're floored by that fish come in the ground. Like, they don't understand that we put fish in basically holes in the ground and it fills up with water. Like, that's the first thing that people don't understand. Like, they're like, what do you mean they're not in tanks? Like, that was a big thing. And then we take them on tours. We take them on a tour of our grow out greenhouse and show them like how water filtration works, how we have what we call a flow through system, and how filtration works, and we show that we literally have not one filter in any single fish tank. We have zero filtration in our entire grow out facility, and look how clean the water is. And it flabbergasts people how that production side works, and we don't have disease issues either. So, because you don't know, our greenhouse works on what we call a flow through system. Basically means water comes in, goes into the vat, and then we have an overfill sort of in our large vats. Water goes down that drain and then out to what would normally be our ponds. So water never touches, it never recirculates, and that's to prevent disease in case one tank got sick. You're not spreading disease and sickness through everything. It's all individualized and compartmentalized. So I've got 1,000 angels per vat, and one vat of 1,000 got sick. The other 10,000, 20,000 in the greenhouse at a time will get sick as well. That was a different, I think people just not understanding the scale of the aquarium hobby. Like, really, when I say we put out 10,000 angels a month in production, and it's probably 8 to 10, that number seems to bore people. Like, that's a lot. And I'm like, we're nothing on the spec of production on angels. Like, Urban Farms puts out, they just did a video on one of our local news channels. I think they said they did 2 million angels last year. That's 10 times our production.
Wow!
And they are the largest, and they've been around as long as I can remember.
So, I mean, talking about your flow through system, just about how many gallons of water move through your system in a day?
Well, we turn over the vats probably 2 to 3 times a day on average. The vats are 200 gallons a piece. There is, I'm trying to count the vats in my head. So there's roughly 70 vats, let's say. So one vat's going to turn over, what did I say, 2 times? Let's say 2 times, so 400 gallons. Yeah, like, what is that, 280,000 gallons a day, roughly, of water.
Is that all?
Yeah, that's enough.
So for those of us who are like, so that's kind of like a drip system, right? Not even close. Just the amount of water.
It's definitely turning over water quicker than that for sure. It's not dripping in and doing that. It's a pretty high flow rate.
Wow, I think that's really cool insight. All right, so we'll move off of that. We're also kind of talking about this, but what do you think is the biggest problem that American fish farmers face today that they didn't face, say, 20 years ago?
I think 2 things. I think one has probably still been around since then, and I think that's still combating imports. I think that will always be a problem. And truthfully, technology overseas is getting better. So Europe, Asia, those places in technology for aquaculture are growing at rates faster than America. And those different technological areas basically allow for more efficient production. And farms are having a hard time adapting to that production status and that production level of efficiency, which just isn't here. So I don't know. That to me are probably the two biggest things. So basically, essentially, imports and technology would be huge. And it's different overseas for a lot of that stuff. A lot of the farmers don't have to. Obviously, wages is a huge thing, but they're not making a ton of money in the overseas production. A lot of them, and we've got to compete against that, where we've got to feed our families, and that's a much different amount of money in scale. I mean, it's worldly different, 100 times different, probably in money scale. So to compete in that area where fish are, pennies on the dollar, like it makes it to where farms have to find a way to be more efficient in those areas. And I think the biggest problem I see now moving forward is purely labor. Doing pond work is the most grueling position work out there. There is no harder job, in my opinion, than working ponds. So if you've got ponds in the ground and you've got to take fish out of a pond, you've got a lot going on. So the way it works in pond work is you can have fish these holes in the ground, and you have a lot of orders for them. You have to do what's called seining the pond out. When you seine the pond out, it's basically running this humongous net across it. Without being too technical, you basically use the big net to catch all the fish out and move them to like some holding containers. And then you've got to drain down. Well, you'll probably do this ahead of time, but you've got to drain down the pond. So you use this big, humongous pump to suck 20,000 to 50,000 gallons of water out of it into a. If you have a discharge permit, you can put it in your ditch for discharge. If you don't, you've got to send it to a percolation pond where it's like a settling pond. And then basically get down in there in the muck, which I don't know if you're aware, but organics and you do this once a year. Your organics will build up at the bottom of your pond to basically make a foot layer minimum of muck, where you will step in it. It looks like mud, and it is just detritus. It's really all it is. It's broken down everything over the year. And you have to go out there and get the pump that's like a 4-inch freaking pump and suck all the sludge and everything you can out the bottom of the pond. And then you have another smaller pump that we used to call those a wash pump, where we put one line in the adjacent pool. It would suck water from that pond, and the other end it would be like a fire hose. And you would spray. I'm going to do this on the video because everyone I know wants to come do this with me that I've been talking with, and I can't fathom that people want to do this. But you basically wash the banks down with this fire hose to get all the sludge and stuff off the banks, where it all runs to like a point in the pond where you can get all the suction of sludge out of it. And then once the pond's done, you put down, it's called hydrated lime. Hydrated lime is basically it increases your pH so high, it kills all of your parasites and nematodes and things in your pond. So you can basically reestablish the pond for production. So you lime it, the whole thing gets limed. It kills everything, and it raises your pH to like above 11, 12, 14, 13, like way up there.
Wow.
And then you let the pond fill back up naturally, and over the time, when it starts to fill back up, then you would add what's called cottonseed meal to it, which is basically a reseeding to help reestablish that biological nitrification system back in the pond. That's a long-winded story, but finding people that can do that kind of work is it's almost impossible.
Okay, so then we'll talk about this because I'm sure there's some recent factors that probably also are kind of scary that we probably have to address. But what, from the hobbyist perspective, is the biggest benefit of buying American, right? So other than like you want to be like rah pro American business, what's the biggest benefit of me going out and making sure that I'm sourcing a fish from an American fish farm?
I think I call it touch points. So to me, and I think this is important for everybody, the more touch points a fish has to go through within the supply chain, the more stress you're putting on that animal. The least amount of people that touch that animal before it gets to your house, the better off that fish is going to do. And I don't mean it in terms of the fish is like sick and it's got lots of diseases. I mean in terms of like it just can't handle the amount of touch points. And some fish are obviously more fragile than others. Some are not. And the closer you can buy to the source, the healthier fish you get, because purely it has only been handled a handful of times. So to give you an example, if you like rummy, let's use rummy nose tetra as an example. Rummy nose come from two places generally, and I'll use them kind of generically. You can get them wild caught. I believe Project Piava offers them. They have them in their list, which those are pretty awesome. And you can get them tank raised out of Singapore or Indonesia typically from there. And if they come from Asia, so they're going to come from a small farm. So that's one touch point. That's the main one. They'll go to export, right? And then export will then ship them over to somewhere in the States. And they can have a couple different movement options from there. What we do, and this is for our own distribution, buying fish out of Asia and get into Florida is almost impossible. The fish just don't do well, and it would be almost a 36 to 38 hour flight time. It's very difficult to get them here. So we'll use a transshipper for Asian fish out of California. There's like 5. And what they do is they'll order the fish, they'll rebag them, and then they'll ship them on to us. So that's still being a third touch point. At least it's not they're in a system and they're sitting there for days. These fish literally come in and they are rebagged and put back on the airplane. There is no, I'm in a system with like 15 million other fish. And it's done that way to hopefully prevent less stress on the animal. It's a lot of movement parts. And then from there, we'll get them in and then we will have to quarantine them. At scale, quarantining isn't done at time. And then if you think about it the way a lot of times that works, if I buy a fish from Singapore and I buy a fish from Malaysia and I've got a Florida fish and I've got a wild caught Colombian fish, if you put all those fish in the same system, I don't care how good your filtration is. I don't care if you've got 19 UVs running on it. Like, they come with different varying degrees of whatever they were exposed to that the rest of them aren't. And that's going to create problems and stress and water quality issues that are not going to acclimate properly. And then sometimes you might have issues that it looks like nothing's wrong, and then you lose a few. Where they didn't look sick, they were eating super well, and then you don't know what happened. And I truly believe it has to do with touch points. So we're trying to eliminate it, us, and there's a few of us doing it now, trying to eliminate all the touch points we can so we can provide people with a healthier fish. And I really think that's made a lot of difference both in the local business we do here and our distribution business.
Okay. So I think that segues us directly into a question I have. How do you ensure that Consolidated Fish Farms stands out from your competition? And I mean, I think the most common one that most of like us hobbyists are going to know is going to be something like your Seagrass Farms or Cichlid Exchange, some of the big distribution houses that feed a lot of our local fish stores. How is it that you guys, or I say, what is it that makes you special and stand out from the others that are out there?
Well, I've got a kind of a complicated answer to that. I would say on our distribution side, we're realistically, the way we've done business is we've had the same customers for 20, 30 years. We haven't really looked to pick up a ton of new clients because we're kind of picky. We want people to understand our values and what we're looking for and what we're looking to accomplish. And not everybody's on board with that. Sometimes it's only a price thing where people only want the cheapest possible item out there. And that's not going to be us. And I'm very upfront with people, and they see our prices, and like, we might be cheaper on a couple things here and there, but we're probably not going to be cheaper on a lot of things. And we're not going to have, this is the downside. We're not going to have the variety. We're not going to be bringing in, fish from 6 different countries and have 50 varieties and what we feel we can do the best at, that we know the best. And the last thing is, for the imports we do bring in, those are the fish our customers have come to us and said, these are the fish they can't keep alive and they don't know what's wrong. So then we went out and brought those fish in here and figured it out. And then all it really was 2 week touch points, and then we quarantined them for 2 weeks. That's a lot of time and effort, a lot of space to hold that many fish, but that worked out well for us. where essentially is um, there's a lot. If there's any loss, we take it on our end, which is very costly. But in the end, it ends up working out better because we can negotiate those deals with our suppliers and say, hey, look, we're having issues that day, whatever it is. Like, they look good, and I will tell you, there's a point in time in imports where fish will just break down, and they will randomly get sick randomly. They look good and everything's fine, but then you have to quarantine, and and be very mindful of your quarantine environment, not just what you're medicating with, but food is very important. Lighting is incredibly important. We literally take into account anything that we think will bring in stress or stressors on our fish, physical, chemical, procedural, whatever it's going to be. We take all those into account and make it as stress-free as we can make it for that sort of thing. So, and hats off to the people that are the big guys that can pull this off. It's not easy, and I don't know if there's an answer at scale like that for bringing in that many fish. But then you have sort of what I would say the double-edged sword as well. If we don't have the varieties for people to purchase, is there that many people looking for more fish? And I don't know the answer to that specifically. We're trying to do more varieties. I know every supplier out there wants to bring in a few more types of fish that people maybe haven't seen before, but I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. So we're really just focusing on putting out some good fish, the people we've been doing customers, and then really honing in, honestly, on a lot of the retail aspect of it. That's been a huge. I think that's probably our factor is more retail based than wholesale or distribution. I would say we like all of our wholesale. We still have quite a few people, but I think our push is to really help people hit that next level and be like, hey, this is where your fish come from. And on our website, you can see I have every fish. I should have every fish under its name picture. It'll tell you what country that fish came from. If it came from Singapore, it'll have the Singapore flag. It'll have the little, on mobile devices, it'll have flag, a little emoji flag, and just to show people, hey, this rummy nose came from Singapore, or this one came from Project Diablo, and it came, out of Colombia and down in the Amazon. So,
cool.
I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. I think I kind of am obligated to talk about this because it impacts someone like you the most. Lacey Act.
Yep.
There's a lot of knee-jerk reaction on YouTube, right? Or at least some will say that, and there's a lot of panic because the way that a lot of us read it might be different than how you and maybe any of the other farmers you talk to read it. So from the perspective of a farmer, what is either the part that is the scariest, or maybe it's like this is what people are blowing out of proportion and is not as scary as they think it is?
So I think for this portion of the bill, I'm pretty optimistic that it won't impact farms a whole lot if it doesn't just get cut out. Okay. And but I think there's some other parts that are kind of scary to me. And I was in one of our FTFFA board meetings, and we had a speaker come in and said, listen, this is not the first time language like this has come about. Mm-hmm. And it certainly won't be the last. The issue will be is we have to win every time, and they only have to win one time. And that kind of me is somewhat scary.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think a lot of people know this, but there has been talks about FWC implementing what they're calling a safe list here in Florida.
Okay.
Now, we don't know what that means. Is it basically a whitelist that they want to create a statewide whitelist, which would be insane, which is going to create massive industry issues. And that's the most immediate problem, I think. The Lacey Act at the federal level, I don't understand how it could survive purely based on the amount of revenue the government would lose from that, from both direct and ancillary businesses, is so massive. It'd be billions, and I don't understand how that would make sense.
And you're talking specifically the concept of going from a blacklist to a whitelist?
Correct, yeah. If you're talking about just the pure regulation of it would make things almost impossible. If it was taken as is, right? That's, saying, hey, it's only these species. Hey, you're eliminating the entire industry that at farm gate's worth $175 million. Well, at retail, that's well into the billions if you start counting all the other businesses involved. Well into the billions of revenue.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, it makes no fiscal sense for me, I think, as a government. That's my perspective. And I think if they actually looked at those numbers, they would be like, yeah, we're going to lose a lot of money if we do that. That doesn't make a lot of sense. The states are already maintaining their own lists. They do a good job of making sure those fish species aren't in the country or in the state. Obviously, it hasn't always been like that. Clearly, Florida is the poster boy for invasive species. I think no one can deny we have an issue, and that's where this stemmed from. And that was the Rubio. He put it up because of all the invasive species down in Miami, which I understand. I'm not mad about that. I think there should have been a better way around it. But he has a very hardline stance on this and doesn't want to hear from industry, which I thought was, I didn't realize that's how bad it was going to get. This stuff that we're having issues now was done 30 years ago. Changes in policy have happened so much over time that we've made a lot of adaptations that we didn't know were going to be an issue back then. So I think now the states do a pretty good job of managing that. FWC does a good job of managing that. And then we also have FDACs here, which is Florida Department of Ag. They do all the best BMPs for farms that they have to abide by. And we get checked twice a year from Ag. So for me, I think how we manage things works pretty well. Sure, we can change a few things here to critique things and make it better. I think you can always do that. But when we go from such a one standpoint to such a adversely different aspect of it, I think I don't understand it. Like, is the impact that much greater that it would, you rather risk losing, tens of thousands of jobs and millions of revenue to the state that needs the money to operate everything we do? Or do we just try to find out where the issues are, the root causes, and try to work on some of those? So, like I said, like the Lacey account's written, I'm optimistic it's probably going to get just tossed and not kept as is. But the scary thing is when's the next time this is going to come up? And then do we have a potential issue for some sort of statewide whitelist? I really hope not. But that to me is the more scary. That's the scarier option, because that would have the most damaging effect on farmers for sure.
Okay, well, then I think it's good that you feel the biggest problem is similar to what me and a few of the other folks that I've had some pretty rational conversations with. Is like the concept of flipping from blacklist to whitelist is what seems the most damaging to. While we're a niche hobby, it's still a large industry, even in the United States.
100%.
Not to mention like how that could hamper other, even those farmers that we're importing from. How does that hamper them? Because all of a sudden a large consumer is just shut down.
Yeah. Well, if we were playing devil whitelist, you can only bring in these species that are being cultured here. Well, farms, I think at some level would be like, oh, great. The imports aren't here. Farms won't have to compete with imports anymore, which I think that's kind of a goal of it. But the problem people don't see is Florida doesn't have that many species in comparison. And then if you only have the same, 500 to 1,000 species, let's say, your demand in farm production will go through the roof, which means your price on fish is going to go through the roof because there's not going to be enough fish to supply the demand. And then the variety level will be, tenfold smaller than what's available now. I think would cause a lot of people to leave the hobby because they couldn't find the fish they were looking for.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of a double-edged sword. Yeah, it'd be great for the farmers left, but we don't have an influx of people buying land here to put in production farms. It's not like that's a hand over fist. We have people coming down here and moving every single day, but they're not putting in aquarium farms and buying farms and stuff, I think it would be good if they did. I still believe it's a good business to be in at the moment. But at the same time, it's like if they cut out all imports together, I think you're going to lose a big chunk of the hobby that says, well, I really liked rummy nose. I really liked guppies. There is no Florida commercial farm doing guppies.
I really like rainbow fish.
Well, they come from Florida. You have some of those.
Not that many, though.
Not that many. Maybe 15 kinds, 13 kinds, I think. And not many people doing them. But guppies to me was always the craziest thing. Like, no one does guppies. There's no fancy guppies down in Florida. They're all brought in from Sri Lanka and Singapore, generally.
Yeah, and I think some Thailand too, right?
Some Thailand guppies. Yeah,
Yeah,
Thailand's big. A lot more, I think, specialized guppies in Thailand. I've
yeah.
seen that look really
I've
nice.
seen a lot of like real crazy stuff come in from Thailand, and I'm just like,
Yeah, for
that
sure.
thing's gonna live for like 25 seconds in my tank.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't. I've never done Thailand guppies. We buy all of our guppies out of Singapore because they have shorter bodies and bigger tails, and we like that.
Mm-hmm.
Versus the Sri Lankan guppy is going to go for the male, and it just doesn't like. I don't like it as much. Plus, when we get them, they're so big, they're old. Guppies don't have a huge lifespan. You already get
Yeah,
them super adult size, they're not going to live very long, and then people are losing them left and right. So
yeah. You're kind of
it's
hoping that they spawn in your tank, and that next generation is going to be the one that you actually get to enjoy,
and
as
that's it.
opposed to the ones you bought. Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool. Well, thank you, Dan. It's been a pleasure. Give you a last few moments for those who have stuck with us this long. Where can they find you? Where can they buy your fish? Uh, what are you up to? Let everybody know.
sure. So I will say I've been very absent on YouTube. I did start an Instagram called Aquarium Insider, where I'm going to start putting up short clips of like my day to day work because that's easier for me to manage. I will put out some YouTube videos and podcasts as well. Coming up in probably the next 30 days. That's my time frame I gave myself. And then if you'd like to find more about me or what we do from a business side, you can follow us at Consol Fish Farm on Instagram or consolidatedff.com is our website.
Great. Well, Dan, thank you very much. For those who are here in the YouTube space, look for part 2, where we're going to do a big question and answer session. I polled my community, got a ton of questions of just what do you want to know from a fish farmer. So be watching for that. As always, sir, thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Looking forward to part 2.